Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a profoundly complex and honestly heavily misunderstood topic. If you spend any time on social media, you've likely seen the modern glorification or romanticization of mental health struggles, which can seriously blur the lines of what true clinical depression actually is. On the flip side, we see many church communities falling into this damaging trap of spiritual reductionism, essentially oversimplifying a highly complex medical illness into a mere spiritual flaw. So today we're going to clear the noise, break down the facts, and look at a fully integrated approach to human suffering.
Is clinical depression just a lack of faith? We've got to confront this painful tension right out of the gate. If you or someone you love has ever navigated the dark, suffocating waters of major depressive disorder within a faith community, you might have unfortunately felt the sting of this exact stigma. It's a massive, heavy burden to carry, adding this immense layer of guilt and profound isolation to a condition that is already completely crushing.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these specific stigmatizing phrases cause real-world harm. When well-intentioned communities throw around things like, "you're just less grateful," it severely alienates the person suffering. It shrinks the pastoral space needed to actually accompany someone with true empathy. Instead of offering a desperately needed lifeline, these words effectively dump all the blame squarely on the shoulders of the person who is already struggling just to survive the day. It turns an illness into a character flaw, which is absolutely devastating.
And surviving the day is literally no exaggeration. Just look at the sheer scale of this issue. According to World Health Organization data, an estimated 280 million people worldwide suffer from depression. 280 million. This is a severe global urgency. It's not just a fleeting sadness or a bad week, it's a condition where more than 700,000 people die by suicide every single year. Let's just pause and think about that scale for a moment. 700,000 lives. We absolutely cannot afford to misunderstand this or brush it off with shallow advice.
The core of the problem is that ministries often mistakenly reduce depression to one of these two extremes. On the left side, we see the deeply moralizing view. It's treated purely as a spiritual problem, supposedly a direct consequence of a lack of faith or unconfessed sin. But then, on the right side, we see total medicalization. It's viewed as just a normal medical illness, completely stripping away the deep existential and spiritual suffering the person is enduring. Both of these extremes are woefully incomplete because they completely ignore the beautiful, complex reality of the individual.
Section 1. The biopsychosocial reality.
To really grasp what's happening to those 280 million people, we've got to look at the hard science and our physical bodies. Modern psychiatry increasingly relies on the biopsychosocial spiritual model. So let's look at the biology. At a molecular level, depression involves neurotransmitter imbalances and disorders in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA pathways. Now, in plain English, the HPA pathway is basically your body's central stress response system. When it dysregulates, your body is constantly sounding a physiological alarm that just won't turn off. Plus, studies analyzing thousands of brain scans reveal that patients with major depressive disorder actually have a noticeably smaller hippocampus, which is crucial for processing emotional memory. At the same time, their amygdala becomes hyperactive to negative stimuli, while the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logical decision-making, is hypoactive. This is a structural, biological vulnerability. It's a physical reality that completely removes the cruel idea of a moral failing from the equation. The brain is literally struggling to regulate its own physical architecture.
Moving seamlessly from the biological right into the psychological, we see how our thought patterns become deeply distorted by this illness. In cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, there's a highly effective technique called the downward arrow. Let me give you an example of how this plays out in real life. Imagine you make a minor mistake at work. A negative thought pops up. I messed up today. With the downward arrow technique, you keep drilling down. You ask, well, if that's true, what does that mean? You might answer, it means I'm bad at my job. Keep drilling. What does that mean? It means I'm a failure. Keep going. It means I am fundamentally unlovable, and even God doesn't care about me. Do you see how a minor error spirals into a full-blown existential crisis? By identifying and challenging these deeply rooted core beliefs, therapy actually powerfully mirrors the biblical call to renew the mind, untangling those knots one by one.
And all of this overwhelming psychological pain inevitably bleeds into the social sphere. A key symptom of depression is profound social withdrawal. But here's where communities often get it so drastically wrong. They interpret this isolation as spiritual distancing or a clear sign of disobedience. In reality, it's a clinical expression of anhedonia, which is the complete inability to feel pleasure. Things that used to bring joy just feel numb. It's a symptom of a psychic wound and a deep feeling of social unworthiness. It is not a rebellion against the community or against God.
Okay, Let's dive into this next part. Section 2. Rethinking Christian Faith.
If we're really using a holistic, biopsychosocial spiritual model, we have to properly define what the spiritual piece actually means, especially within a Christian context. These terms get tangled up all the time, but separating them is absolutely vital. Religiosity refers to organized practices, rituals, the external norms of a community. Spirituality is a broader, highly subjective, personal inner search for meaning. But Christian faith? That's fundamentally different. It's not this anthropocentric, human-centered movement where we try to reach up to the divine through our own sheer effort. Instead, it's a belief and hope rooted entirely in God's initiative and redemptive grace.
So the crucial takeaway is this. Treating faith as a human effort or some kind of achievement is exactly what leads to immense, crushing guilt for the depressed individual. When we tell someone they lack faith, we're basically implying they just aren't trying hard enough, adding even more weight to someone who can barely stand. But theologically, Ephesians chapter 2 makes it explicitly clear that faith itself is a divine gift. It is not something you manufacture through willpower, it's something you receive. Understanding this totally relieves the pressure. It takes the burden of performing for God off the shoulders of the person whose very mind is actively working against them.
And this brilliantly illustrates that this entire integrated framework isn't just subjective opinion. It is grounded in rigorous, peer-reviewed academic study. Take this research from the East Asian Journal of Multidisciplinary Research, for example, which serves as the foundational source for our explainer today. It relies on deep theological, psychological, and psychiatric analysis to build a complete picture of the human condition.
Section 3. Theology meets psychology. For way too long, science and theology have been positioned as enemies in the battle for mental health. But an integrative approach believes that valid scientific truths can actually be seen as part of a general gift to equip us. They can harmoniously bridge the gap, rather than functioning as rivals. We see this beautifully when looking at historical thought. While modern psychology might not use the exact language of ancient theological wisdom, like Thomas Aquinas' views on natural law, they share incredible common ground. Both strive to understand the deep complexities of human rationality, our actions, and our fundamental drive to seek good and avoid harm. Aquinas argued for the holistic unity of the human person, body and soul intimately connected. Today, a modern psychologist analyzing cognitive distortions in brain chemistry is essentially exploring that exact same connection. They are complementary lenses for viewing a whole, complex human being.
Section 4. A house of restoration.
When we finally understand the biology, the psychology, the devastating social isolation, and the true grace-based nature of faith, it calls communities to build something drastically better. This is exactly how faith communities can become transformative healing environments. First, we absolutely must check our moral judgments and oversimplified spiritual slogans at the door. They just do not help. Second, we have to deliberately cultivate safe spaces where someone can just be, even in a state of ruin, without feeling the stigma of not smiling enough. Third, we don't abandon faith. Rather, we integrate empathetic prayer with robust clinical, psychological, and medical support. They work together. And finally, we actively combat social isolation through faithful presence, understanding that a person's withdrawal is a symptom of deep pain, not a lack of love for you or for God.
By embracing this multidimensional model, we stop treating depression as a spiritual failure, and we start treating the whole, beautifully complex person. So the question I really want to leave you with today is this: will your community be a silent space of judgment or a true house of restoration? Think about it, reflect on how you support those around you, and let's keep seeking to understand the reality of the human mind and spirit. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.